I used to think love was a simple formula, something you could predict and fit neatly into categories. Boy meets girl, they fall in love, they get married, and the story unfolds just like every romance movie I had grown up watching. That belief was my compass for years, guiding me into relationships that never felt quite right but seemed good enough to keep. I dated men because it was expected of me, because society made me think that was the only version of love worth pursuing. And yet, every time, there was a hollow space inside me, an emptiness I couldn't name. I blamed myself, convinced I was difficult, too demanding, or maybe simply not meant for the kind of love others spoke of with glowing eyes. That illusion cracked one rainy afternoon when I stepped into a small cafe tucked away on a quiet street. The place wasn't special, dim lights, the comforting smell of roasted coffee beans, and the sound of rain tapping against the window. But it became the setting of the most important moment of my life. I was there to escape the storm, laptop in hand, pretending to work while I scrolled aimlessly, my thoughts circling back to the dissatisfaction I carried like a secret. Then she walked in. At first, I noticed only the sound of her laugh, warm, unforced, like a melody that instantly eased the air. My eyes followed the sound, and there she was at the counter, ordering her drink with an easy grace. She wasn't trying to be noticed, but every detail drew me in. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the curve of her lips when she thanked the barista, the confidence in her posture as though she knew who she was and had nothing to prove. She wasn't the kind of beauty plastered on magazine covers, but she was something far rarer, authentic, magnetic, unforgettable. I tried to look away, to force my attention back to the blank document on my screen, but my gaze kept betraying me. When she turned with her cup in hand and our eyes met for the first time, my breath caught. It wasn't just eye contact, it was recognition, a spark that seemed to whisper, "Here you are." I smiled without meaning to, a shy and uncertain smile that felt strange after years of hiding behind polite indifference. To my surprise, she smiled back, her expression open and effortless, as though she had been waiting for this moment, too. It was such a small exchange, just a meeting of eyes and a curve of lips, but it shifted something deep inside me. I didn't know her name, didn't know if I would ever see her again, but in that instant, a truth stirred awake in me. Women, I realized, were not at all what I had been taught to believe. They were something entirely different, something powerful, something that could unravel everything I thought I knew about love. For the rest of that afternoon, I couldn't shake her from my mind. Even as I stared at the half-written sentences on my laptop screen, all I could think about was the warmth of her smile and the way her presence seemed to alter the air around her. It was ridiculous, I told myself. She was a stranger, someone I'd probably never cross paths with again. But something inside me was restless, as though a locked door had been cracked open and a rush of fresh air was pouring through. I glanced up occasionally, pretending not to look for her, but my eyes betrayed me each time. She had taken a seat near the window, one leg tucked under the other as she sipped her coffee and read a book. Her concentration was intense, but every so often, she would pause, turn a page, and smile faintly, as though the words on the paper were her secret companions. That smile was enough to undo me all over again. The longer I watched, the more I noticed the little details. The way her fingers traced the edges of the pages, the way she tilted her head when she was lost in thought, the quiet confidence in how she carried herself. She radiated something I had rarely seen before, ease, comfort in her own skin. It drew me in like a magnet, made me wish for the courage to go over and say something, anything, just to hear her voice again. But courage had never been my strong suit. I sat frozen, rehearsing imaginary conversations in my head, my heart racing at the thought of walking over and introducing myself. What if she thought I was strange? What if she smiled politely and went back to her book, leaving me humiliated? That fear was enough to keep me glued to my seat, trapped in my own hesitation. And then fate, in its subtle way, intervened. When I finally gathered the strength to stand and head for the counter, my clumsy hands betrayed me. My phone slipped from the edge of the table and clattered to the floor, skidding across the wooden boards. Before I could even react, she was there, kneeling gracefully, picking it up with a laugh that sent warmth rushing through my veins. "You dropped this," she said, her voice soft yet steady, carrying the kind of tone that made everything else fade. She handed me the phone, her eyes locking with mine again, and I felt that same spark pulse through me. "Thank you," I managed, my words catching in my throat. "No problem," she replied, still smiling. "You looked too focused to notice." In that moment, something shifted. She wasn't just a stranger anymore. She was someone who had crossed the invisible boundary between our worlds. And with that one simple interaction, I realized I wanted to know everything about her. After she handed me my phone, I expected her to return to her seat by the window, to dive back into her book and leave me clutching my gratitude like a secret. But instead, she lingered for a moment, as if she were waiting for something more. I felt the silence stretching between us, urging me to fill it with words before the chance slipped away. What are you reading?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. Her smile widened, not in mockery, but in welcome. She held up the book so I could see the title. It was a novel I had heard of but never read, one that people often described as both heartbreaking and beautiful. "It's one of my favorites," she said. "I've read it more times than I should admit." I laughed nervously, the sound almost surprising me. "That's how you know a book's good, right? When you can't help but go back to it." Her eyes lit up, and for the first time, I noticed the flecks of gold in her otherwise dark irises. "Exactly," she said. "Do you read much?" That was all it took. Suddenly, we were talking, not small talk, not polite exchanges, but a real conversation that unfolded like an old friendship. She pulled out the chair across from me, as though it was the most natural thing in the world, and soon her coffee cup was on my table, her book set aside. We spoke about stories, about the authors who had shaped us, about the way words could sometimes capture feelings too vast for real life to contain. I told her about my love for writing, how I had always wanted to put my own voice into the world, but had been too afraid of failing. She listened with an attentiveness that made me feel seen, truly seen, in a way I hadn't felt in years. Her name, I learned, was Lena. Just saying it in my head felt strange and electric, as though her name itself carried weight. She asked me questions that dug deeper than the surface. What inspired me? What scared me? What I wanted to do if I could let go of expectations. Each time I answered, her gaze never wavered, her expression warm and encouraging. Hours passed without us noticing. The cafe grew quieter, the rain outside easing into a gentle drizzle, but inside, time seemed to hold still. There was a rhythm to our words, a flow that made everything else disappear. At one point, she laughed at something I said, a real laugh, rich and unguarded, and I found myself staring, memorizing the sound. Something fluttered in my chest, an ache both terrifying and exhilarating. I didn't want the moment to end. When she finally glanced at her phone and realized how late it had become, she sighed softly. "I should probably go," she said, standing reluctantly. Then she looked at me, her smile playful yet sincere. "But I'd like to continue this conversation sometime, if you'd like that too." I felt my heart leap. "I'd love that," I whispered. And just like that, the possibility of something new bloomed inside me. The days that followed felt different, as if the world had shifted slightly on its axis. My routines remained the same: work, errands, evenings spent pretending to write, but beneath it all was a hum of anticipation I hadn't felt in years. I found myself glancing at my phone more often, replaying the sound of her laugh in my mind, the golden flecks in her eyes when she spoke with passion. It was ridiculous, I told myself. We had only just met. And yet, the thought of her lingered like the aftertaste of something sweet, impossible to ignore. It didn't take long for Lena to reach out. A message appeared one evening. "I don't know about you, but I could use another good conversation. Coffee again." My heart fluttered as I read it, and my fingers trembled when I typed back, "Absolutely." "When?" We met 2 days later at the same cafe, though this time, it felt different. I wasn't watching her from across the room. I was waiting for her, eager, nervous, and filled with an energy I couldn't explain. When she walked in, her smile found me instantly, and just like before, the world seemed to brighten. We talked for hours again, about books, about life, about the small things that made us who we were. But this time, the air between us carried something more, an undercurrent I couldn't name, but felt in every glance, every brush of her hand against the table near mine. At one point, our laughter overlapped, and she reached out, resting her hand lightly on mine as if it were the most natural gesture in the world. The touch was brief, but it sent a shockwave through me, awakening something I had buried for far too long. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of our meeting. Her voice, her eyes, her touch. It was terrifying, the way she made me feel, because it forced me to confront questions I had carefully avoided all my life. I had never thought of myself as someone who could fall for a woman. Yet here I was, feeling more alive in her presence than I had in all my years of dating men. Over the next few weeks, Lena became a constant in my life. We met for coffee, for walks in the park, for late-night conversations over the phone that stretched until dawn. With every moment, my walls crumbled a little more, replaced by a tenderness that felt both fragile and unstoppable. One evening, as we sat on a park bench watching the sunset, she turned to me and said softly, "You're easy to be around. It feels like I've known you much longer than I have." I swallowed hard, my chest tight with emotions I couldn't name. "I feel the same," I admitted. And as the last rays of sunlight painted her face in gold, I realized that this woman, were a completely different matter. Something I could neither resist nor ignore. The more time I spent with Lena, the more the edges of my old life blurred. Days once filled with monotony now held a quiet thrill, an anticipation of when I might hear from her again. She had a way of making the ordinary extraordinary, turning a simple walk into an adventure, a casual conversation into a revelation. Being around her felt effortless, like slipping into a rhythm I didn't know I had been missing. One evening, we decided to cook dinner together at my apartment. It was something small, something normal, yet the very thought of having her in my space made me both nervous and giddy. She arrived with a bottle of wine in one hand and a bag of groceries in the other, grinning like she had been looking forward to it as much as I had. "Let's make something simple," she said, unpacking vegetables onto my counter. "The best meals are the ones you don't overthink." We chopped and stirred, laughing at our mistakes. The onions that made us both cry, the sauce that almost boiled over, the bread I forgot to take out of the oven until it was nearly black. But it didn't matter. What mattered was the way she filled my kitchen with warmth, how her laughter bounced off the walls, how natural it felt to move around her. When the food was finally ready, we sat side by side at the small table, sipping wine and sharing bites as though we had done this 100 times before. At one point, she reached across to wipe a smudge of sauce from the corner of my lip. The touch was fleeting, casual even, but my breath hitched. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the air between us grew charged, heavy with something unspoken. I looked away quickly, my cheeks burning. But that single touch lingered, echoing in every corner of me. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, a spark that seemed to illuminate the truth I had been avoiding. I wanted her. Not in the vague, uncertain way I had wanted before, but in a clear, undeniable way that terrified me. Later, after she left, I stood at the doorway for a long time, staring into the empty hall. My apartment felt quieter without her laughter, colder without her presence. I realized then how much space she had begun to take up in my heart. That night, as I lay in bed, I tried to make sense of it all. Why her? Why now? But deep down, I knew the answer. It wasn't about timing or circumstance, it was about Lena herself. She was different, in ways that defied explanation. She had shown me a kind of closeness, a kind of intimacy that I had never known before. And though I was still afraid of where this path might lead, one thing was certain, I didn't want to turn back. It was late on a Friday evening when Lena invited me to her apartment for the first time. I hesitated at her door, clutching a bottle of wine too tightly, my palms damp with nervousness. When she opened the door, barefoot in an oversized sweater, her hair tied loosely back, I felt my heart trip over itself. She looked so effortlessly beautiful, so unguarded, that I nearly forgot how to breathe. "Come in," she said, her voice warm, carrying that familiar ease that always seemed to settle me. Her place reflected her perfectly, books stacked on every surface, soft blankets draped across the couch, little plants lining the window ledge. It felt lived in, inviting, like a safe corner of the world that belonged entirely to her. We poured the wine, curled up on the couch, and let the evening unfold with the same ease our conversations always carried. She told me about her childhood, her travels, the heartbreaks that had shaped her. I listened, captivated not just by her words, but by the way she spoke them, honest, vulnerable, without fear of being seen. At some point, the conversation faded into comfortable silence. The only sound was the soft hum of music from her speakers and the quiet rhythm of our breaths. I became acutely aware of how close we were sitting, our knees brushing lightly against each other. The touch was small, accidental perhaps, but it sent a shiver through me. When I glanced at her, she was already looking at me. Her eyes lingered, searching, as though she were asking a question without words. My chest tightened, my pulse racing, and in that suspended moment, the world outside seemed to disappear. "I don't want to scare you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not," I replied, though my voice trembled with the weight of everything I was feeling. She reached out then, her hand brushing against mine, tentative but deliberate. Our fingers intertwined slowly, carefully, like two puzzle pieces finally finding where they belonged. The warmth of her hand in mine felt like an anchor, pulling me into a truth I had been circling for weeks. Time seemed to stop as we sat there, holding hands, neither of us looking away. Then, with a kind of courage I didn't know I had, I leaned in ever so slightly. She met me halfway. The kiss was soft, tentative, almost questioning, but it carried the weight of something inevitable. My heart raced, my breath caught, and in that moment, I felt everything fall into place. All the doubts, the fears, the years of denying myself, they melted away in the warmth of her lips. When we pulled back, our foreheads resting together, she smiled gently. "See," she whispered. "Sometimes the heart knows before the mind catches up." And in that instant, I knew she was right. The days after our first kiss felt like living in a dream I never wanted to wake from. Everything was brighter, sharper, more alive. The simplest things, her laugh over the phone, the way her name appeared on my screen, the memory of her lips on mine, sent warmth rushing through me. I caught myself smiling at random moments, as if my heart had been lit with a flame I could no longer hide. Yet, beneath the joy, there was also fear. Years of telling myself who I was supposed to be clashed with the undeniable truth of who I was becoming. Late at night, I would lie awake, replaying our moments together, both exhilarated and terrified. I had never allowed myself to imagine this kind of love, and now that it was real, it felt like both a revelation and a rebellion. Lena, however, carried none of my hesitation. She was steady, certain, as though she had always known the truth I was only just discovering. She never pushed, never demanded. Instead, she gave me space to breathe, to find my own footing. But she was there, always there, with her gentle presence, her warm hands, her unwavering gaze. One evening, we walked along the river as the city lights shimmered across the water. The night air was cool, and I found myself inching closer to her until our arms brushed. Without hesitation, she took my hand, her fingers threading through mine. The gesture was simple, yet profound. I glanced around nervously, half expecting the world to react, but no one paid us any mind. And in that small freedom, I felt something shift inside me. "You look like you're overthinking again," she teased gently, her thumb brushing across my hand. "Maybe I am," I admitted. "This is all so new to me. Sometimes I'm scared I'll ruin it or that I don't deserve it." She stopped walking then, turning to face me. Her expression softened, her voice steady. "You deserve love. Real love. The kind that makes you feel safe and alive all at once. Don't let fear convince you otherwise." Her words pierced through me, melting the last of the walls I had built around my heart. In her eyes, I saw no judgment, no expectation, only acceptance, only love. And for the first time, I allowed myself to embrace it fully, without shame, Without hesitation. I leaned into her, resting my head on her shoulder as we continued walking. The city moved around us unaware, but inside me, everything had changed. I wasn't just falling for her, I was falling into myself, into the truth I had been too afraid to see. With every step we took, hand in hand, I understood it more clearly. Lena hadn't just shown me what love could be. She had shown me that women, this woman, were a completely different matter, one I never wanted to let go of. Weeks turned into months, and what began as chance encounters in a cafe blossomed into something I had once thought impossible. With Lena, every day unfolded like a page in a story I never wanted to end. She wasn't just someone I loved, she was someone who taught me how to love, how to live, and most importantly, how to accept myself. There were moments of hesitation, of course. Coming to terms with my feelings wasn't an overnight transformation. Sometimes I caught myself retreating into old fears. What would people think? What would my family say? What did it mean to rewrite the identity I had carried for so long? But whenever those doubts crept in, Lena was there, grounding me with her quiet strength. You don't need to have all the answers right now, she reminded me one night as we lay together, her arm draped around me, her breath warm against my hair. Love isn't about fitting into boxes. It's about choosing each other every day. Her words sank deep, dissolving the last of my resistance. I realized then that it didn't matter what labels the world tried to impose or how others might view us. What mattered was the way my heart leapt when she smiled, the safety I felt in her arms, the way my world expanded when she was near. One evening, we returned to the cafe where it all began. It felt almost surreal, sitting at the same table where our first conversation had unfolded. The rain tapped gently against the window, just as it had that day, and I couldn't help but smile at the symmetry of it all. Do you ever think about how it started? I asked, watching her stir her coffee absent-mindedly. All the time, she said, her lips curving into that familiar smile. It's funny, isn't it? How one moment can change everything. I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. This time, I didn't hesitate. You've changed everything for me, I admitted. Before you, I didn't even know this part of myself existed. I thought love was something I had to force, something that never quite fit. But with you, my voice trembled as emotion rose in my throat. With you, it feels like home. Her eyes softened, and she squeezed my hand gently. That's because it is home. With me, you never have to be anything but yourself. Tears stung my eyes, but they were born of joy, not fear. In that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of the cafe and the warmth of her touch, I felt a peace I had never known. Lena had shown me that love didn't have to be a compromise or a performance. She had shown me that women, her, were a completely different matter. And in choosing her, I had finally chosen myself. For the first time in my life, I wasn't pretending. I was in love. Truly, deeply, fearlessly in love.